The global race for green batteries is on, and the Nordics are at the forefront. Can the Nordic value chain become the epicentre for sustainable battery production in Europe? Find out in this episode of Business Sweden News. Demand for green batteries accelerates. How are the Nordics co-creating a sustainable value chain? And how will the Nordic battery industry support new EU standards? Sweden is on a mission, together with its Nordic neighbours, to produce the world's greenest batteries. With surging demand being driven by the acceleration of e-mobility and the clean energy transition, can the Nordics lay the foundation for the EU's goal of strategic autonomy in sustainable battery production? In the studio, we have Julia Altenhofer from Northvolt, the trailblazing company that established Europe's first homegrown gigafactory in northern Sweden, the catalyst for the Nordic battery industry. Julia, global demand for batteries is projected to grow by more than 30% annually over the next 7 years. And your company's mission from day one has been to build the world's greenest batteries. How close are you to achieving that at scale?
Thanks for the question. Thanks for having me. We're up and running in our first gigafactory up in northern Sweden in Skellefteå. So cells are going to customers as we speak. And we're ramping that up to 60 gigawatt hours annually. That means more or less 1 million electric vehicles. We have ambitious plans for the moment also in Sweden with 2 more gigafactories, one in Borlänge, and then later one, or at the same time, one joint venture with Volvo Cars outside of Gothenburg. So together, for the moment, our announced capacity that we're going for is around 150 gigawatt hours. So that's quite a lot. And on the point of green batteries, then currently when we do our LCA life cycle assessments, we're ending up at less than half of the industry standard in terms of carbon footprint. And we have ambitious plans to go further than that, down really very, very low. And that really matters. For example, we've done a calculation on the expected European demand of lithium-ion batteries. It's around 1,000 gigawatt hours for 2030. And then we've taken what we think we can achieve versus how the industry standard will become a little bit better. And that difference in just the production of those batteries needed in 1 year in 2030, that's the equivalence of twice Sweden's current emissions. So just for the production, it really matters to get the footprint down.
Okay. And at scale, are you going to achieve that?
We think we are, yeah.
Amazing. And we know that renewable energy and new recycling methods are just 2 of the building blocks for creating a sustainable battery supply chain. What are the other key factors that come into play?
Yeah, you're definitely right. So the renewable energy in the production is really important. And then the next step is also for the supply chain. So the raw materials that you get in, that those are also produced sustainably and with a low carbon footprint per sort of raw material purchased. So that's our next step. And there we are working closely together with our suppliers, and we have specific targets for each supplier, how we want them to advance also. And the next step after that, it's quite a big step, but also localization in the EU. So the more of a European value chain we get, also the further the carbon footprint will come down of their raw material. And apart from that, it's also the energy efficiency in the actual processes. So having sort of state-of-the-art production, those I would say are the next steps for lowering the carbon footprint.
Okay, so collaboration is quite important.
Very.
Okay, so Jessica, you're part of the management team for the Nordic Battery Collaboration, which is a joint initiative set up by Business Sweden, Business Finland, and Innovation Norway. Why are the Nordic countries well positioned in the green battery race, and how do the countries complement each other?
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me as well here today. And if you take a step back, the demand for green batteries right now, at a scale that we have never seen before in our industrial lifetime. And the supply is far behind. So to close that gap, we need to act sustainably. We need that gap to be filled with a sustainable value chain. And when it comes to the Nordics, Sweden offers, actual cell production and investments in more. a really strong world-leading automotive industry with cars, but also trucks, off-road vehicles. And we do have leading researchers and prominent researchers in this area, and a culture of working together. And Finland has a really strong mining history with actual mining, with refineries, active materials, and combining that with also production of machinery. And in Norway, coming from the process industry that is really strong, they have initiatives for cell production, and they have the research as well, and they have one of the world's highest EV share of the market share, and the maritime industry. And when you take this together, we actually complement each other and create a full value chain together.
Okay, so take us behind the scenes of the collaboration. What are the primary advances and challenges being addressed? You touched on some of them. Can you go a little bit further into those challenges and advances?
Yes, and when it comes, well, our intention is to put the Nordics at the heart of Europe's production of sustainable batteries. And there are developments happening every day at a really high pace in Europe and in the Nordics. And what is where we come from in the Nordics is we come from the green, stable and quite affordable energy that we need to invest more in. We come from this triple helix way of working together, and we have an industrial history where we do have the traditional industries that this new value chain of batteries build on is our strongholds. That's where we come from. But of course we see challenges for the industry moving ahead. It's quite sincere at the moment. And to pick a few, I mean, we need to secure supply chain within Europe. As of now, we are importing a lot of the materials going into production. We are building up production, but we have one example of our homegrown gigafactories, and that is Northvolt. And the rest still needs to get production going. And then we need things as machineries and chemicals in order to get this production going. And we need competence. And I think one key thing is the access to raw material.
Okay. Back to you, Julia. As the EU battery regulation comes into force, it will set the standard for how batteries must be produced, used, reused and recycled in the European Union. And we've also heard whispers about a battery passport. But what are the key components of this new framework and how will it impact the Nordic ecosystem?
Yeah. It's a really landmark regulation, the new battery regulation. It's a new way of looking at products and looking at their life cycle from cradle to grave, really. So the most important aspect, one of the most important aspects, at least from our perspective, is that there are common rules and common calculation methods for sustainability aspects for all batteries that are placed on the European market. So for example, the first one is the carbon footprint. A common calculation method will be set for calculating the carbon footprint of all batteries, and then transparency will be created in 3 steps. Step 1 is to have that each battery has a declaration. Step 2 is then that you have performance classes, so as we know for fridges today or for appliances. And then the third step is even to set a maximum threshold for that carbon footprint. So it really shows that Europe is serious about wanting the battery industry or the whole electrification to be sustainable from the get-go, and that's very, very positive. So it's driving the market towards becoming better. Apart from the carbon footprint, there's also focus on recycling. So different recycling goals are set, both at sort of the collection per chemistry, but also how much you get out of at the end of recycling of different raw materials. Very positive as well. And the third, third main point from our perspective is the focus on due diligence. So it's not just business as usual. You need to actually know where your raw materials come from and be able to say that human rights and environmental standards and so on have been upheld for a given set of raw materials. So that will also lead to a much more sustainable industry for everything that comes into Europe. And of course, one can hope that later these type of rules are replicated in other areas, in other regions.
And it seems that you've both talked about it being a collaboration, and Northvolt have recently created a joint venture called Hydrovolt, together with the Norwegian energy and aluminium company Hydro. Can you tell us about the recycling plant in Fredrikstad and how are you solving the biggest technical challenges in battery recycling?
Exactly. So there, Norway is really advanced when it comes to electric vehicles. So that means that they also have batteries at end of life, or vehicles and batteries at end of life, more than other countries. So it's starting there really makes sense from a sort of just the business perspective, that there's something to be collected. And the joint venture is aiming to recycle up to 12,000 tons of batteries per year. And the idea then is that the mechanical steps are done in Fredrikstad at Hydrovolt. So that's the collection and then discharging the batteries, dismantling them, and then crushing and sorting them. So you'll have different fractions at that point. And then, for example, the aluminum goes to Norsk Hydro, and whereas the black mass will then in the future go to us, Northvolt in Skellefteå. And the other parts are also taken care of by other actors. So it's a real circularity that is started there. And that's the first step. So for example, for the battery, the black mass contains the valuable nickel, manganese, cobalt, and lithium, those raw materials. And those are the ones that later in northern Sweden, we will be recycling into battery-grade materials again and be using straight in our production at that same site.
It seems like, Jessica, these innovations are happening quite quickly. How is Sweden and the Swedish battery ecosystem ensuring that it can evolve to embrace these innovations that come about in the future and ensure European competitiveness?
Well, what we are talking about here is also an industry in its infancy. It's a new industry. It's been driven by electrification and by the climate targets, and that's what we are aiming for. And coming from a history of, well, as we talk about Sweden, we do have we're highly valued when it comes to innovation, and where that comes from is usually from flat hierarchies and a very innovative and creative working space. And this might seem intangible, but it's really not. You can take it into real numbers and real innovations. So working closely with smaller companies and make sure they grow, working very closely with academia. In Sweden, we do have one of our most prominent researchers, Kristina Edström at Uppsala University, is also heading the Battery 2030 Plus of Europe. So it's very important, as you say, to not just look at building up today's markets. That's critical to get going at all. But the next step is really to see how can we make sure that we have the long-term competitiveness. And one key component there is, of course, to make use of the brand and the companies and the actual goals and actions that our industry in Sweden is taking for sustainability, because that means also attracting talent that we really need to increase the number of people working in this industry, if it's blue collar or white collar, and to have them to come to Sweden or work with Sweden also on global markets.
Fantastic. Leveraging innovative opportunities is just one reason why global suppliers are investing in the Nordic battery value chain. One of these investors is Kodali, the world's leading supplier of casings for lithium-ion batteries, and I'm joined now by the company's supply manager in Sweden. Thank you for joining me, Yin. Why did Kodali choose to build its first overseas production facility here in Sweden?
Kodali, we are a global leader in lithium-ion battery casing, and we are proud to be expanding our reach with our first European facility in Sweden. We chose Sweden for some pretty compelling reasons. First off, Sweden is a sustainability superstar. People have been leading the charge on environmentally friendly tech for years, and that's a perfect match for Kodali's own commitment to the sustainability. Another key factor is the workforce. Sweden is home to some of the most skilled and innovative people in the world. We know that we are going to need a top talent to take Kodali to the next level. So Sweden workforce is exactly what we are looking for. Finally, Sweden is known for its positive business climate and excellent infrastructure. Lots of world-leading companies have expanded their business in Sweden. And particularly, we can see that a battery cluster is forming in Sweden. So there you have it, sustainability, talent, and business-friendly condition. We are excited to be part of such a forward-thinking country.
How will your investment in Skellefteå strengthen Kodali's global competitiveness, and what learnings are you hoping to apply in other markets?
Our investment in Skellefteå is a business strategic move. By setting up the facility in Sweden, we'll be able to serve our European customer more efficiently and at a lower cost. Plus, Skellefteå is loaded with renewable power, which is a great news for our energy bills and the environment. Another advantage is the recycling know-how and the infrastructure in northern Sweden. And this will help us create more sustainable solutions that meet the EU's new battery regulation. Furthermore, the long history of industry and the innovation in this region, we are excited to tap into that intellectual capital and put it to work for Kadali. Ultimately, our investment in Skellefteå is going to teach us a lot about engaging customers, developing sustainable practice, and optimizing manufacturing processes, and creating positive work environment. We will definitely take those valuable lessons and apply them in the global marketplace.
And what advantages does the Nordic battery value chain offer your company and others to meet new standards and regulations for sustainability and quality globally?
The Nordic battery industry is leading the charge in sustainable and high quality production. They are not just talking the talk. Instead, they are walking the walk to actually making the oil history by implementing eco-friendly processes at every step over the value chain. As one of the upstream suppliers, we have experienced and deeply felt this. One big advantage is that the Nordic countries have strict environmental and labor law, as well as regulation on hazardous chemicals. So every aspect of battery production is held to the highest standard for sustainability and quality. And Sweden is a powerhouse when it comes to mining. With abundant natural resources and a focus on responsible sourcing, I believe Nordic battery companies have the opportunity to be fully self-sufficient. And overall, the Nordic battery value chain is uniquely positioned to meet the new standard and the regulations for sustainability and quality. Their commitment to the environment and the society is not just a lip service, it's a fundamental part of their DNA.
Thank you so much for your time, Jinju.
Thank you.
Now I'm joined in the studio by our next guest, Ilke van Dalvik. Ilke, welcome. What policy strategies are being put forward to break down the barriers to designing out waste and closing the loop in the battery life cycle?
Thank you. And I think this is a very important question you brought up, this circular economy. And I think their batteries have an advantage over other products because we can use and reuse the materials that we put into a battery. And one of the I think, hallmarks of regulation is the battery regulation that was put forward back in 2020, where they have requirements based on recycling rates and recycling efficiencies. And that will give an intrinsic value to the materials to be put back into the loop. And there will be also requirements on recycled content for newly produced batteries, which will further stimulate the closed loop thinking of the battery industry. For that, you need to know where your material is, and there the battery pass, that is also a piece of the battery regulation, will play a very important role. And this is something that still needs to be developed. But there are ongoing projects both on national and EU level that hopefully will fulfill what Northvolt alluded to on the standardized calculation methods and how this can be implemented in Europe, but also globally to open up for new sectors in the battery industry.
And can these challenges be overcome fast enough to meet the exploding demand from the automotive and energy sectors, while at the same time meeting these very stringent climate goals?
The battery industry is growing dramatically. I think the demand for raw materials, they grow together with the battery industry, so to say. So recycling will not be enough to meet the demands of the battery industry. If you're just looking at lithium, for example, there will be a six-fold growth in need for lithium until 2030 and 11 up to 2040. So for this, you need primary raw materials. And I think this is another thing that the material that we need to produce, we should do it in the most sustainable way possible. And this means we should avoid unnecessary transports, localize supply chains, and I think there is a need for establishing a domestic raw material industry in Europe also to fulfill at least parts of the demands that we need for the battery industry. Recycling needs to be built up simultaneously, but there should not be an overinvestment in recycling capacity. We need also to keep the eye on the primary materials.
So you have a lot of experience working with the European Battery Alliance, and can you tell us what role do you think the Nordic countries will play as batteries become a strategic industry for the EU?
I think the Nordics are in a really good spot for spearheading a lot of what is going on in Europe. One that we have as a home advantage is, of course, energy with a very low CO2 footprint. And I think Northvolt already explained how they want to lower the CO2 footprint of their batteries, which is very good in the production. But also, if we go upstream, production of battery raw materials and active materials is very energy intensive, and I think here we can have a leading role in really producing materials that have a lower footprint. But there's also a lot of innovation that we're doing in all the Nordic countries and how to mine in the most sustainable way possible. And this is then, of course, connected also to the entire industry that is around the existing mining industry, with machinery that using battery, innovation and digitalization of mining processes. So I think here Europe can learn a lot from the Nordic countries, in fact.
It seems like the global battery boom is a huge challenge, but also a major opportunity to change the course of history. How do you feel about that?
It's been a tremendous development that we have seen during the last 5 years that we have been working with the European Battery Alliance, and really see this industry start from nothing, and now we see so many projects along the entire battery value chain that are developing. We have our first homegrown European cell manufacturer up here in the Nordics. We have projects on refining, on new applications from all the Nordic countries. I think that is a really great time to experience. Now we see, unfortunately, some dark clouds on the horizon with the US Inflation Reduction Act that has been published, the ongoing war in the Ukraine that really shows us that you can weaponize everything. And we should be careful not to treat our dependency on fossil fuels to a new dependency on raw materials. And for that, I think the Nordic countries are well suited, because we have the resources, we have the knowledge and the capacity really to build up local, sustainable supply chains here up in the Nordics.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ilka. Thank you for your time. It's clear the Nordic battery industry has the power to become a pillar of sustainability in the region's future industrial landscape. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next episode.